Диктуємося самі.
Доброе утро. Раз, два. Вас слышно?
І чого? Один ВС в Україні. Такий як Болгарія. Так, вже починається це, ми повинні включитися до них. Стараюся з ними сконтактувати. Наш мікрофон. Говорю.
Нещо специално да иска.
Смисъл?
Ние сме. Ladies and gentlemen, there are free chairs over there. Please go and take seats here. Заповядайте, тук има свободни места. Започваме.
Да.
Уважаеми министър Тагарев, уважаеми народни представители, заместник министри, ваши превъзходителства, дами и господа, От името на Софийския форум за сигурност, чието председател съм, искам да ви приветствам с добре дошли на днешната конференция. Тази конференция обаче не би била възможна без сътрудничеството с посолството на Съединените щати в България и аз благодаря на посланник Мертен за цялостното съдействие. Отправям благодарности към посолството на Украйна в лицето на посланник Олесия Илашчук за тяхното съдействие отново за организиране на конференцията и изложбата. На фона на агресивната война на Русия срещу Украйна, на фона на случващото се в Близкия изток, ние предложихме да обсъдим въпросите за мира. Как да бъде постигнат мир в Украйна? Несъмненно най-голям интерес от постигане на мир има народът на Украйна, който продължава да страда от непрестанните бомбардировки. Но всички ние имаме интерес от постигане на мир, който да бъде дълготраен, базиран на ясни принципи. Защото това ще определи бъдещата архитектура на сигурност в Европа за десетилетия напред. Ето защо е важно да се заявят и отстояват принципите, на които ще бъдат изградени бъдещите отношения. Категорично трябва да дискредитираме агресията във всичките й форми, трябва да отстояваме правото на всеки народ сам да избира бъдещето си и да настояваме за изграждане на международен ред, базиран на правила. В днешната конференция ще обсъдим широк кръг въпроси, свързани с сигурността. Тези въпроси са комплексни и на много от тях не се вижда отговор днес, но те пряко засягат България. И за мен е притеснително, че в тази комплексна среда за сигурност нашата национална система за сигурност се пропуква, раздирана от политически дрязги. Не случайно, когато говорим за национална сигурност, говорим за система. Защото и най-добрата информация, включително тази получавана от службите, е безполезна без добър анализ. Но и най-добрият анализ е безполезен, ако няма адекватни решения и действия. Но и най-добрите решения не могат да са ефективни, ако не се комуникират добре с обществото. Ето защо е необходимо да се намери тази платформа за комуникация и взаимодействие на всички нива, за да сме адекватни на процесите, които се развиват около нас. Сигурен съм, че днес с нашите отлични лектори и чрез дискусиите ние ще допринесем за по-доброто разбиране на средата за сигурност и заедно ще търсим решения за мир. С тези уводни думи искам да поканя министър Тодор Тагарев за неговото обращение към вас.
Благодаря, господин Божилов. Поздравявам ви за организацията на тази конференция. Тематиката, която сте избрали, е изключително важна и в зависимост от това как света върви към решаване на проблема на войната в Украйна, възстановяването на един траен мир, ние ще видим едно или друго развитие в средата за сигурност и съответно различни изисквания към системата ни за сигурност, а и въобще към цялата система на държавно управление. Ваши превъзходителства, членове на дипломатическия корпус, уважаеми дами и господа офицери, аз благодаря за тази покана. Ще бъда кратък, защото идеята е да имаме повече дискусия, отколкото изнасяне на лекция. И ще се спра на три въпроса. Първият въпрос е кои са ключовите събития, ключовите развития, които формират средата за сигурност, в която ние работим в момента. Първият фактор, това е агресивната политика на Русия и действия на Руската федерация. Това започна по един много видим и мащабен начин още през 2008 година с войната срещу Грузия. Премина през незаконното анексиране на Кримския полуостров и всестранната поддръжка на сепаратистски движения в Донбас и кулминира с мащабната военна агресия срещу Украйна през февруари миналата година. Това носи значителни рискове за целия евроатлантически регион. В среща на върха в НАТО ние обявихме руската заплаха като най-значителната и директна заплаха за сигурността на региона. Това определение е в пълна сила и до този момент. За България то се отразява в бежански потоци, в различни инциденти, които се случват в Черно море, инциденти, които стигнаха до територията на наши съюзници, като Полша и Румъния, например. До момента ние имаме щастието да нямаме паднали ракети или дронове на наша територия, но всички знаете, че имахме случая с открития дрон с мина на брега на Черно море, откриване на мини, незаконния бординг, който осъществих военноморските сили на Руската федерация на кораб съвсем близко до нашите териториални води, провокациите, които Русия предприема с декларираното провеждане на учения в голяма част от нашата изключителна икономическа зона, нарушаване на свободния трафик, на навигацията по море. Всичко това са проблеми, които проистичат директно от руската агресия. Ако добави към тях и хибридните действия, вече ситуацията, в която ние работим, става доста сложна. Второто значителни развития са в Западните Балкани. За съжаление, вече повече от 30 години от началото на войните в бивша Югославия и операцията на НАТО от 1999 година, която допринесе за стабилизиране на обстановката, не може да бъде намерено трайно решение на проблемите на сигурността. Знаете за събитията от май месец и особено от края на септември месец в северните провинции на Косово. Обстановката там не се успокоява. Това налага ние да отделяме значително внимание на проблемите на сигурността в Западните Балкани. И третият най-важен фактор, това е терористичната заплаха, която стана особено видима с терористичните актове на Хамас срещу Израел и последвалото напрежение, което може би все още има вероятност то да ескалира допълнително. Тези събития по принцип могат да доведат до нарастване на миграционния натиск спрямо България и напрежения между различни групи, които поддържат едната или другата страна в този конфликт на наша територия, така както това се случва и на територията на други европейски страни. Към момента вероятността за това е много малка, но ние сме длъжни да полагаме усилия за наблюдаване на обстановката, постоянен анализ, както каза и господин Божилов, на ситуацията и да имаме готовност да усилим реакцията тогава, когато се наложи. Какво правим ние в тази обстановка? Първото е, че ние работим с нашите съюзници. Това е най-важната гаранция за нашата сигурност. Знаете за решенията от Мадрид, а след това и от Вилнюс на срещите на върха на НАТО. Ние имаме система от действия за повишена бдителност, за възпиране и отбрана на източния фланг на НАТО. Ние работим вече много интензивно за изпълнение на регионалните планове, като част от цялата фамилия от планове на НАТО за възпиране и отбрана на източния фланг на Алианса, което има пряко значение за нашата сигурност. По отношение на ситуацията в Черно море, вече излезе публично информацията и ние го отбелязахме на среща на министрите на отбраната миналата седмица с колегите от Турция и Румъния. Работим за създаването за стартирането на противоминна операция. Около 2 месеца работихме без тази информация да е публична. Вече е публична. Остават за уточняване на някои малки детайли и аз лично разчитам, че в близко бъдеще тази операция ще бъде стартирана, което ще допринесе както за по-високата сигурност в нашите териториални води и изключителната икономическа зона, така и за износа на зърно от Украйна, което е изключително важно не само за Украйна, и въобще за сигурността на изхранването в голяма част от света и съответно би имало принос за решаване на тези проблеми, които вече отбелязах. По отношение на Западните Балкани, мисля, че също информацията е публична. Ние усилихме нашето присъствие, изпратихме допълнително около 120 военнослужащи. Сега имаме близо 150 военнослужащи в Кейфор, поддържаме рота в операцията Алтея и имаме намерение да продължим това участие в стабилизирането на Западните Балкани, тъй като тези действия имат пряко влияние върху сигурността на региона и респективно върху нашата сигурност. И на най-важната тема Украйна, виждането на българското правителство, и то е подкрепено с декларации на Народното събрание и решения на Народното събрание, е, че мир стабилен мир в региона може да има тогава, когато ние помогнем на Украйна и Украйна успее да възстанови своята териториална цялост и суверенитет в границите, признати от международната общност, границите от 1991 година. Без този елемент ние въобще не можем да разчитаме на някаква стабилност в региона, тъй като гарантирано в този случай, а дори да има и възстановяване на териториалната цялост, не можем да очакваме автоматично намаляване на агресивното поведение на Русия. И за да погледнем в по-дългосрочно за решаване на тези проблеми, правителството, знаете, е готово и планира за следващата година да задели 2% от брутния вътрешен продукт, разходи за отбрана. Процент, който най-вероятно ще бъде надминат през следващите 3 години в България, тъй като изискванията вече към въоръжените сили са много големи. Но да се върна пак към въпроса за Украйна. Ние оказваме всестранна помощ и дипломатическа, политическа, военна и хуманитарна помощ на Украйна. Ще продължим да оказваме тази помощ според нашите възможности до тогава, до когато това е необходимо. Разчитаме и ще работим заедно с нашите съюзници за адаптиране на архитектурата за сигурност, тъй като предполагам, че това ще бъде предмет на дискусия. Агресивната политика, агресията на Русия на практика разбива основите на международната система за сигурност. Ние трябва да видим по какъв начин ще работи тази система за сигурност в бъдеще, ако Русия продължи с това свое поведение. Това също го виждаме като помощ за Украйна. Ще отбележа накрая, че тази помощ за Украйна, тя е и краткосрочна, с предоставяне на военна подкрепа, на материални средства, да може Украйна да защити себе си като страна, своите граждани, критична инфраструктура. Тя вече има и вече разглеждаме и в дългосрочна перспектива. По такъв начин да помагаме на Украйна, че тя да изгради необходимите институции и способности във въоръжените сили, така че при първа възможност тя да стане член на НАТО, да стане член на Европейския съюз, което ще постигне и пълните гаранции за своята сигурност. Благодаря и съм готов да участвам в дискусията.
Благодаря, господин министър. Сигурен съм, че ще има много въпроси, затова ще помоля нашите помощнички да вземат микрофоните. Това са, да кажа, стажанти в Софийския форум за сигурност. Едното момиче от Молдова, другото от Украйна и много се радвам, че те учат в България. Това е един много добър знак за нашата страна. И да помоля колегите, които стоят там, да заемат места. Има отпред. Тук заповядайте. Заповядайте, има места в предната част на залата. Преди да задам въпрос и да дам възможност за въпроси от залата, искам да ви попитам. Вие споменахте за това, че България е изправена пред необходимостта от увеличаване на отбранителния капацитет. Това означава естествено и придобиване и на нови системи, означава много засилена работа с нашите съюзници. Аз искам специално да отбележа този напредък, който се реализира буквално в наши дни. България, Румъния и Турция да започнат много по-интензивно сътрудничество, защото преди години като че ли трите страни нямаха точно това, което се изисква от средата за сигурност. Въпросът ми към вас е, ще има ли подкрепа от една страна в Народното събрание, защото модернизацията изиска много средства, и как виждате пък обществената подкрепа за изграждането на отбранителния капацитет на България, за това, което Министерството на отбраната предприема?
Както казах, в прогнозния бюджет за 2024 година ние залагаме 2% от брутния вътрешен продукт. Това е още по план, прият през 2018 година на правителството, който ние изпълняваме и може би дори ще преизпълним малко тази година, но до година стигаме 2%. И в прогнозната 3-годишна макрорамка този процент се запазва, дори все още тя не е готова в окончателен вид, но аз затова използвах термина и вероятно. Вероятно ще превишим тези 2% през 25-26 година. До момента все още по бюджета няма дискусии в Народното събрание, но имайки предвид изразяваната многократно подкрепа за повишаване на отбранителните способности на страната, за модернизация на армията, мисленето за хората в униформа от най-различни политически сили, представени в парламента. Аз се надявам, че едно такова предложение на Министерския съвет ще намери пълна подкрепа в Народното събрание. И тук искам да отбележа, че решението от Вилнюс, което разбира се е взето и с наше участие, че тези 2% от брутния вътрешен продукт вече не се разглеждат като цел за постигане, те се разглеждат като някакъв минимум, под който ни трябва да падаме. И до момента аз не съм свидетел на някакви индикации, че някой ще си противопостави на едно такова решение. Дали то е достатъчно, и това вече е друг въпрос, тъй като в продължение на доста години бюджета за отбрана се свиваше. Ние забавихме много при въоръжаването на армията и сега ще направим възможно най-доброто в тази прогнозна финансова рамка, без да може да посрещнем всички очаквания. Това е неизбежно. Също чуваме, но е необходимо и това, и това, и това. Няма как всичко да стане бързо. Според управленската програма, до края на следващия месец аз трябва да внеса в Народното събрание, т.е. през Министерския съвет, в Народното събрание трябва да внесем програма за инвестиции до 2032 година. Ние работим по въпроса. Вече имаме много голяма яснота по трите най-мащабни и скъпи проекта и ще работим за това да приоритизираме и да разположим във времето реализирането на всички други потребности по възможно най-добрия начин.
А за обществената подкрепа?
За обществената подкрепа излезе преди дни, даже мисля, че бяха 2 отделни социологически изследвания с приблизително еднакви резултати, което показва, че подкрепата за членство в НАТО надвишава двукратно подкрепата на идеята за някакъв тип по-тясно взаимодействие с Руската федерация. Това не трябва да ни успокоява, тъй като е твърде голям процент от наши съграждани, които избират отговора, не могат да преценят кой е по-добре за бъдещето. За нас тези около 20%, които виждат по-тясно сътрудничество с Русия, са вероятно загубена кауза, но трябва да инвестираме усилията си да убедим тези наши съграждани, които не могат да преценят към момента, кое е истинското бъдеще за България. Подкрепата за някакво асоцииране с Русия, там аз не виждам зад нея някакви рационални аргументи. Всичко това е ефект на руската пропаганда, която за съжаление е проникнала много дълбоко в обществените настроения, обществените представи.
Възможност за въпроси от залата. Молбата ми е с вдигане на ръка да ми подскажете кой иска да зададе въпрос и установяваме правилото на 2 минути. Въпрос и коментар не повече от 2 минути. Така че ако някой има, молбата е да сигнализира. Но аз виждам в залата и посланника на Италия. Италия е рамкова нация за осигуряване на специално нашата част на източния фланг, а някои вече говорят за източния фронт, предвид войната на Русия срещу Украйна. Как се вижда 20 години до година членство на България в НАТО, 75 години от основаването на НАТО? Единството на НАТО, готовността на НАТО да изпълни най-вече член 5, готовността на държавите.
Примерът, който дадахте с националната бойна група, за която имаме амбиции тя да стане бригадна бойна група, е много показателен в това отношение. Ние сме благодарни на нашия съюзник Италия, която пое водещата роля и като рамкова държава и съответно има най-големия принос към тази бойна група, но също така и към останалите 6 наши съюзници, които допринасят с войски за тази национална бойна група. Има, малко рано да го обявявам публично, затова няма да споменавам името, но има много голяма вероятност още един съюзник да се присъедини към бойната група, като участва с войски на наша територия. Всичко това е много ясен знак за готовността на Съюза като цяло да изпълни в пълен обем задачата си за възпиране на потенциален противник и ако се окаже, че това възпиране не сработи, за отбраната на нашата територия, заедно с други наши съюзници на източния фланг.
Да, аз мисля, че в тази ситуация на несигурност в Черноморския регион е изключително важно да се засили сътрудничеството. Впрочем, Софийския форум за сигурност заедно с още две организации от Румъния и от Турция ще представи в началото на ноември в НАТО всеобхватен документ за стратегия на НАТО в Черноморския регион, защото рисковете не са само военни, те не проистичат само от войната на Русия, те не проистичат само от това, че се разрушава регионалния мир, регионалната система за сигурност, но има и много други рискове, които се наслагват. Аз виждам госпожа Елена Поптодорова желае да зададе въпрос и след това уважаеми господин посланник на Грузия.
Благодаря. Моя въпрос всъщност ще продължи ремарката, която господин Божилов направи, или темата, която отвори, но преди въпроса си и като първи въпрос от зала, искам наистина да поздравя Софийския форум за сигурност за събитието и господин Божилов. Трябва да кажа, че съм, разбира се, тук от името на Атлантическия клуб в България и винаги ценим сътрудничеството заедно. Темата сама по себе си ще ни занимава много дълго време и трезвата констатация е, че спирането на военните действия далеч няма да означава мир. По-скоро ще трябва да се търси уредба, която да гарантира сигурността на Украйна и аз даже бих поставила сигурност преди мир. За да има мир, там непременно трябва първо да сме гарантирали териториална и всякаква друга сигурност на Украйна. Но аз също се вълнувам от темата за Черно море и господин министър, първо благодаря, че сте тук. Възможност от първи ранг е да можем да разговаряме с вас. Ясно е, че без регионално сътрудничество на държавите членки в пакта няма как да се договорят мерки, които да допринесат до някакъв по-дълготраен ефект от гледна точка на сигурността в Черно море. И затова бих искала да чуя вашия коментар за това как работят трите държави, при всички особености, които познаваме и които вероятно няма да изречем на висок глас днес. Но това означава също така включване и да партньорските държави, Украйна и Грузия. Каква е възможността, особено при пораженията, които Русия нанесе на два пъти, на Грузия 2008, на Украйна 2015, практически разруши техния военноморски потенциал. Каква е възможността, освен политически, включително и военно-морски мерки да бъдат взети с помощта на съюзниците ни, така че да можем да възпираме Русия от действията, които тя вече предприема с последните новини, които имаме оттам за въвеждане на поредно патрулиране в уж неутрални води. Благодаря ви.
Да, благодаря на госпожа Поптодорова. Наистина Атлантическия клуб е ключов наш съюзник и партньор в много дейности. И въпроса от посланника на Грузия, за да може господин министър да отговори. И с това ще приключим тази част на конференцията.
Your Excellencies, thank you very much for organizing such a timely and very important gathering today. And I'm totally supporting Minister's vision regarding the definitely Georgia and Ukraine should be in the NATO as soon as possible, because this is how we see our future. That's why we are trying for. Just I have a very practical question, like when it comes to the NATO allies in the Black Sea. What about, there is a lot of things are going on there in terms of the security perspectives and in terms of the connectivity perspectives as well. And I have a question like what goes when it comes to the demining of the Black Sea. This is the one of the most important cases, and what are our partners are doing in terms in the Black Sea. Thank you.
Да, благодаря за въпросите. Първо за участието на съюзниците в тази операция по противодействие на минната опасност. В наш интерес е наши съюзници да се включат в тази операция. Има различни форми, които можем да дискутираме, но едно важно съображение е да не предизвика допълнителна ескалация от тази, която ние вече наблюдаваме в Черно море, което се транслира в съблюдаване на ограниченията на конвенцията от Монтреал. По отношение на включването на Украйна и Грузия, тук бих казал, че тя все пак ще бъде ограничена в водите на трите страни, които са прилежащи към Черно море. Към момента не се предвижда взаимодействие с военноморските сили на Украйна, формално взаимодействие и навлизане на тази група в украински води, в които в момента се води война. Операцията ще бъде, такива са нагласите, тя ще бъде отворена за включване на Грузия, може би на по-късен етап, тъй като все пак основните ни съображения, основните рискове са в западната част на Черно море, където именно са Румъния, България и отчасти Турция. Аз мисля, че така отговорих и на посланника на Грузия.
Да, благодаря ви, господин министър. Аз като дългогодишен наблюдател и участник в определени моменти на правене на политики по отношение на Черно море, искам да кажа, че съм изключително удовлетворен от активната роля на България, от това, че България проявява инициативи и не само проявява инициативи, но има и конкретни дейности за гарантиране на сигурността в Черно море. За съжаление, още веднъж ще отбележа, че това контрастира с една пасивност, която се наблюдаваше в миналото. Надявам се, че ще продължи България да заема полагащото се място като гарант на сигурността в Черноморския регион. За съжаление, времето ни приключи. Ние имаме със сигурност още много въпроси. Надявам се в един диалогичен формат после да ги зададат колегите към вас. И с това искам да поканя господин Заков, посланник Заков и посланник Смит да заемат местата на трибуната, но преди това нека да благодарим на министъра на отбраната за неговото участие в нашата конференция.
Благодаря и аз. Благодаря, успех.
So, I think we are ready to start.
Yes, indeed.
And after the excellent first session with the Defense Minister, it's my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Julian Smith. She is the United States Ambassador to NATO, and she has an extensive career as a civil servant at the US government and also in the non-governmental sector. And of course, we had the chance to work together for a while as ambassadors of two allies in Brussels before I left overnight last year. So, Julie, your visit to Sofia is yet another sign of the strengthened US-Bulgarian partnership. And this is really a sign that it deepens further. So welcome once again to Sofia.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to see you again, especially here in Sofia. I haven't been to Sofia in several years. It's great to be back. Congratulations to the organizers for this terrific event. We have a wonderful turnout, and it's just a treat to be back in Bulgaria.
Very good. Thank you once again for making this effort. I know how busy you are in the NATO headquarters. But let me go straight to the first question and first topic, if I may. So your visit to Bulgaria comes at a very crucial time for the security in the Black Sea region, but also in the Middle East. So the Russia's war in Ukraine and the Hamas's brutal aggression against Israel show that security is not taken for granted, definitely. So we must strengthen our defense capabilities, and I think the defense minister alluded to that just a moment ago. And also the whole system of international relations has been put at test. So what we are doing now will have definitely effects for the near future, even for the next maybe 2 or 3 decades. So my first question is related to the how I see it. So I think nowadays the Middle East crisis shifted in a way the public attention from the Russian military aggression against Ukraine. And here comes my question. I'd like to ask you for your opinion. What do you think is the impact of the crisis on the security situation in the Euro-Atlantic area?
Well, thank you for that, and I know that it's on the minds of all of the members of the alliance. The United States has had a number of questions in recent days about whether or not the United States can maintain its focus both on Russian aggression inside Ukraine, but also on assisting our friends in Israel in the face of these unspeakable, barbaric attacks in that country. And I think the president's words last night, he was able to go out and give a public address and speak directly to not only the American public, but also the world. I think his message was quite clear, and that is that, number one, the United States has the capacity to do both. We're a big country with a lot of different types of tools and abilities to assist with a variety of international security crises and conflicts. And so in our view, we believe we will continue support for Ukraine, assistance will continue flowing, we will continue to lead inside the alliance. Our other friends around the world are helping us with Ukraine, but we will also be able to continue to provide important security assistance to our friends in Israel. But the president had a second point, and that is not only does the United States have the capacity to do so, but the United States has an obligation to do so. And that comes to the important role that we believe that we play on the world stage, working with friends and partners and allies around the world. And so again, we will lead inside the NATO alliance, working with good partners and allies like Bulgaria. And there we're so grateful for everything that Bulgaria has done for the people of Ukraine. But that we will be able to focus not just on the Middle East, but we will continue to have a watchful eye in other regions, including in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, thank you very much for these remarks. And I just remembered how we were working together in the February of 2022 to have the first actually US troops in Bulgaria, the Striker company. It was before the battle group even was set. But let me come back again to the Black Sea region and talk about the war against Ukraine, because I think this is the biggest threat actually to our region, to Bulgaria as well, as we speak. So the title of this conference is about peace. And the main question is how we can win the peace, of course. Still, big part of the Ukrainian territory is still occupied. The hostilities are still ongoing. But I think we should talk about peace anyway. Because, as I said, what happens today will predetermine our future in the next decades. And so the question now is very, very straight: how we can win the peace in Ukraine.
That brings us to a number of important questions. First and foremost, we have worked very closely with our friends in Ukraine to talk about peace, to talk about their vision for peace, and they've put out a 10-point peace plan that we support strongly. And I know your country supports strongly, and many other countries around the world. We also believe, like many countries around the world and the Ukrainians themselves, that the resolution of this conflict will ultimately come through some sort of negotiation, some sort of political negotiation with the two parties. Ultimately, Russia could bring peace today if they so desired. Russia started this war in February of last year. It is blatant, unprovoked aggression. They could stop it today. Unfortunately, we don't have an indication right now that Russia is willing to come to the negotiating table, even as the Ukrainians are laying out in very concrete terms what peace will ultimately mean. So our focus remains on getting the Ukrainians the practical support that they need right now to get through the winter, to continue fighting and pushing back on any Russian attempts to retake more territory, and they're fighting to push the Russians off of their territory and out of their territory. So we will focus in the immediate sense on those requirements, but we will support any international effort, any international actor that wants to try and serve as a mediator. We've seen many countries step forward and offer that kind of assistance. We would just want to ensure that those countries are engaging both parties, both the Russians and the Ukrainians. But there have been attempts. There have been meetings hosted by our friends in Saudi Arabia. We've seen the Chinese step forward. We've seen Turkey get directly involved in this. Ultimately, though, the conditions under which the Ukrainians are willing and able to come to the negotiating table will be determined by them. It will not be dictated by any single country or group of countries. And our efforts right now are focused on altering Putin's strategic calculus to get him to come to the negotiating table and end this war as soon as possible.
Yes, and you're right that actually Russia started this war, and I remember the last NATO-Russia Council we had in January 2022, before the war started, and when I think many of us ambassadors realized that most probably the war is unavoidable already at that time. But let me now switch to the hybrid risks. As we all know, many member states are holding elections this year, including Bulgaria has elections coming in just a week, 2 weeks. Also, there are important US elections coming. And of course, in democracies, public opinion really matters. So my question is, how do we communicate with our people what is happening in the security field? How successful are we in the strategic communications, and how do we see NATO's role in this context? And this is also related to what Minister Tagarev mentioned in his introduction about the restricted zone Russia has been notifying already for more than 3 months in the large part of the Bulgarian exclusive economic zone, not far from our territorial waters, therefore Article 5 territory. So how can NATO help addressing all these risks and threats? What do you think?
Well, that's a really important question, and as you know, these hybrid tactics are a key focus for the alliance right now. NATO used to be about conventional military threats. The alliance was designed to cope with tanks rolling across borders, but the NATO alliance today is about so much more than conventional military threats. This alliance is looking at the full spectrum of hybrid tactics that both Russia uses, but other countries such as the PRC or Iran, and that brings us to things like disinformation, malicious cyber attacks, economic coercion, attacks against critical infrastructure. So this is an alliance that is looking forward, that is prepared for the future, and is very tuned in to the challenges associated with disinformation, because we see Russian attempts, Chinese attempts to try and divide our societies, try to put out counter narratives that create splits in our politics. They try to create splits across Europe. They try to create splits between Europe and the United States by putting out all sorts of conspiracy theories. There are conspiracy theories about NATO's role in Ukraine. There's conspiracy theories about NATO's purpose more broadly, conspiracy theories about our individual nations and the role that we play inside the alliance. So all of us here have a responsibility to get the facts straight, to tell our story, to ensure that people understand that the NATO alliance is a defensive alliance. It is not out there promoting war. In fact, it is there to protect all of us and protect our territory, but also our values. We, the United States, with Bulgaria and our other NATO allies, we have shared values: rule of law, democracy, human rights. NATO is there to protect those values and defend them. So everything that the alliance is doing, like this battle group in Bulgaria right now, is about protecting our societies, protecting our people. And the more we can collectively work together and get that message out to young people, to our publics, to politicians and the media, the better. We have to tell our story, and we have to push back against this disinformation that sometimes feels like it's coming at us in waves.
Yes, and I think it's been mentioned also in the beginning, in the previous session, that everything that NATO is doing on the eastern flank is actually not offensive, it's purely defensive. It's not about escalation. Even I think Minister Tagarev was very clear that what we are preparing now with our neighbors Romania and Turkey, this is not about raising tensions, but rather to make the maritime traffic safer and our citizens safer. So let me go to the next question, which is related to the security architecture in Europe. The one we have now and the one we maybe should have in the future. What do you think can be the role of NATO within this future, maybe different also maybe security architecture? We also see NATO is enlarging with new members, which is great, of course, but how effective NATO is to cope with these multiple challenges, with this increased membership, how we can ensure the sustainability of the consensus decision-making process, which is very important for NATO, and how we can ensure also the principle we have enshrined in room 1 of the NATO Council room, which says animus in consolendo liber. So what do you think about this question?
NATO turns 75 years old next year. And I think sometimes folks assume that wrongly, that the alliance might be getting a little creaky and a little bit rusty as it hits that 75-year mark. But actually, the one word that probably best describes the NATO alliance is adaptability. This is an alliance that time and time again has adapted to new security challenges. It had its original Cold War mission, collective defense, collective security. It transitioned over time to looking at out-of-area operations, where it was engaged in the Balkans, and then eventually later, after 9/11, in the Middle East, and focused much more on security issues and crisis management around the Euro-Atlantic area. Now the alliance is having a bit of a coming home. It's returning to its core purpose and mission of collective defense and ensuring that countries like Bulgaria have their defense and deterrence requirements addressed by the NATO alliance. And we've taken a number of steps just over the last year in that regard to really strengthen our regional plans, our force structure requirements. We've made changes to the C2 structure. So it's been remarkable to watch this pivotal moment in NATO's history of responding in real time to the first major land war in Europe since World War II. But while NATO is doing all of that, while it's reinforcing the eastern flank, ensuring that our friends have their security needs addressed, and ensuring that all of us can support Ukraine in its fight, the alliance is moving out on a whole array of new tools. We are talking inside the NATO alliance about space, about cyber, about emerging tech, and the importance of protecting our technological edge. We're moving out on new tools to bring greater innovation into our forces. We talk increasingly about climate security. We're working on women, peace, and security as a new theme and line of effort inside the alliance. So it's breathtaking in terms of an alliance's ability at 75, the most successful military alliance really in history, looking at its original mission and taking that seriously while it's looking forward and imagining some of the threats and challenges that we may all face, not just a few years from now, but decades from now. And so I think to the extent that folks are familiar with the old NATO and maybe they understood years and decades ago what its purpose was, I would encourage folks to take the time to come to NATO, to engage NATO allies and the NATO team on understanding how the alliance is moving out on some of these future challenges. It's fascinating. And again, I think it showcases really how flexible, how adept, how agile this alliance actually is.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Smith. Thank you, Julie, for this very interesting, those are very interesting remarks. Now I think we have at least 10 minutes for questions, and I would like to go now to the audience. So please introduce yourself and also be as short as possible. The 2-minute rule is ruling now. I just want to make sure that also Ambassador Smith is okay with the translation if there is a question in Bulgarian. So I see a gentleman in the back of the room. So please, the microphone. Thank you.
Very much for your presentation, Your Excellency. My question pertains to Central Asia and the republics there. And please do take note, I'm well aware there's an objective difference in geography between the Black Sea, Ukraine, and Central Asia. But my question is to what extent would you say that the countries in Central Asia do hold the key in enhancing Black Sea security and stability, resolving the war in Ukraine, and the future deterrence of Russia? And I'm asking that because the countries there have shown interest over the past years in engaging with international organizations, engaging with the EU, cooperating with NATO on certain issues, and it is a very vibrant region. So over the long term, the next 10 to 15 years, engaging in that region, especially with NATO, for example, as it's done in the past in addressing the issue of international terrorism, how much can that actually change the architecture and the security architecture in a wider region so as to enhance stability? I forgot to introduce myself, Martin Sokolov. Thank you very much.
So thank you for the great question. Is there another one maybe to take 2 in the first series, or I can, okay. Ambassador Smith, over to you.
Thank you for that question, and it brings us to me to an important point that I failed to make earlier, and that is that increasingly inside the NATO alliance, there is a deep appreciation that working with the 31, soon to be 32 proper full-fledged members in the alliance is not always adequate. And increasingly, what the alliance is finding is the utility and value of engaging countries that stretch far beyond the initial membership of the alliance. NATO actually has over 35 partners, formal partners around the world, where we come together with those countries to get their perspectives on how they're looking at the current security threats in their neighborhood. And Central Asia does have interesting, unique, historical, but current perspectives on what's happening in their neighborhood. We need to hear from our friends across that region, and NATO wants to find ways to engage and trade lessons learned. What tools have those countries developed to cope with some of the hybrid tactics that we've talked about here today? What could we take as NATO allies to our friends in Central Asia to share our best practices and our insights with our friends there? And so we very much want it to be a two-way street, and this is replicated with a whole host of nations. We do it with our friends in the Indo-Pacific. We have 4 countries in the Indo-Pacific that we work with. We work with Colombia, is a partner to the NATO alliance in Latin America. We have partners in Africa and across the Middle East. So thank you for raising that that important point. We cannot just always have an at 31 conversation. We've got to fold in perspectives and insights from our friends that are in some ways closer to the region and understand how we can join forces and work together to cope with what's unfolding inside Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for this excellent answer. Is there anyone else willing to ask questions to Ambassador Smith? Mr. Bozilov, of course. You're the host of this conference.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for the excellent session. We learned a lot of. My question is about hybrid sphere. Okay, NATO agreed that cybersphere, it's a fifth domain, cyber attack can trigger activation of Article 5. But what about disinformation, propaganda, and all other aggressive actions, which we know can affect our societies very badly? Shall we just try to debunk for fake news, to, how shall I say it, stay passive? Do you think that NATO and allies should have more aggressive response to the aggressive hybrid attacks?
Well, I don't think we're staying passive. In fact, I've seen a pretty proactive response on the part of the alliance, and it takes different forms. Probably the best example to point to is the use of intelligence throughout the alliance. This has been a critical part of our strategy, was a critical part of our strategy for the United States in the run-up to the war starting in Ukraine. We had an indication that was very clear that Russia was preparing to do this, but we also had an indication that they were planning a series of false flag incidents or scenarios in the run-up to starting the war. And what we tried to do by sharing an unprecedented amount of US intelligence with our allies was to actually get out ahead of the Russians and stop them cold in their tracks by calling out what we could see they were about to do, so that our publics and our allies, all of us could see in plain daylight exactly what the playbook was. We are becoming deeply familiar with the Russian playbook, and by doing that, we're getting better at getting out ahead of them, again, to call them out on some of these actions. I would also say, though, that combating disinformation also comes to the question of resilience and building resilience in our societies. And there we all have a responsibility to work on things like media literacy to help our young people understand. I think about my own teenage son flipping through his phone and looking at the shorts, what's real, what's not, what's disinformation, what's rooted in fact, what sites can you trust, what sites do you have to look away and delete those accounts. We have to build resilience in our societies to help them cope with this challenge of disinformation. So whether it's the steps that the alliance is taking to build resilience, whether it's sharing unprecedented amounts of intelligence with our allies to call out the Russians, or just the good work that all of our societies do with our media outlets to tell our story, I think it is a proactive approach. I don't feel that we are in any way on our back foot just waiting for these waves to hit us. I think NATO, but also the European Union, both of them have become much more agile. They're developing a much deeper toolkit to deal with this particular challenge.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, just to add that Bulgaria has been working with the NATO Public Diplomacy Division since many years.
That's
on
right, yeah.
debunking and trying to be ahead of any kind of disinformation. It's not easy, of course, but I think the work is there, so the capacity is there, and as you mentioned, NATO has been making important step in strengthening internal resilience of, at the level of NATO, but also at the level of allies. So, is there any additional questions? Okay, Ambassador from Romania, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity to have this very important conference here in Sofia. Ambassador Smith just gave me the opportunity to remind everybody in the room of the existence of a Romanian initiative that wants to become, of course, Euro-Atlantic. Namely, in Romania, we have been hosting for 2 years now a Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience, because indeed this is one of the key words to combat disinformation, but not only, and to reach out to our publics to make our societies first and foremost resilient to fake news, disinformation, and hybrid threats of all sorts. So just to remind not necessarily our Bulgarian colleagues, not necessarily our American colleagues, but everybody else in the room, our allies in NATO, but our European Union member states, that this is an instrument that we can, we have now at our disposal, and we can simply build and consolidate and expand together with your contributions. Thank you. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, and we do greatly appreciate Romania's leadership on this question. Resilience takes many forms, and we're eager to work with our friends in Romania, not just on this unique disinformation challenge, but on a whole host of challenges, and really appreciate your leadership on that. Another great example of NATO allies stepping forward and bringing their own experience into the alliance and leading all of us on particular challenges. I would also mention there's a really interesting hybrid center of excellence up in Helsinki, in Finland, on this particular challenge. That's such an important joint initiative to see the European Union and NATO come together. These are two bodies that both clearly see the challenge of disinformation and want to work together. I was able to get up and visit the center a couple of months ago, and if you haven't had the chance, I highly recommend it to folks because their work is cutting edge, and I think it's just a wonderful example that these two organizations actually can work together despite sometimes the headlines that there are disagreements, but this is a challenge where the two bodies are really coming together to bring their collective expertise together.
Yes, you mentioned the role also of the Helsinki Center. I'm glad that Bulgaria joined the center just a month ago, when the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs visited the center and signed the memorandum. So we have, I think, time maybe for one very short question, if any. So, okay, Ambassador Poptodorova.
I hate to see time not fully used for questions and answers, so thank you for accommodating me. Actually, it's probably an unfair question, but I grab at the opportunity to ask it now. And from a current kind of position in professional life, obviously PDD is key to reaching out to societies, because we know, having been in both worlds, that institutions and authorities are not in a position to fully cope with hybrid warfare and disinformation. We definitely need civil society and the organizations which deal with that. So PDD has been used to a more kind of structured, more kind of smooth engagement of civil society and us as organizations. Do you think, as the US ambassador there, that's a personal impression that you may have or may not, is PDD now kind of in any way adapted to a completely different environment with these new challenges having come up?
I do think that all of us have a deeper appreciation of the role of civil society in countering some of these hybrid tactics, whether it's disinformation or some of the other tools that we've seen countries rely on. And I think you've seen a deeper set of partnerships blossom across the alliance in recent years. We're looking for much more creative ways to not only bring in civil society, but I would say the private sector as well. We've learned some really interesting lessons from the companies that immediately showed up inside Ukraine from day one, willing and able to help, but they wanted to connect those efforts to what institutions like NATO was doing or individual countries that were contributing to Ukraine. Ukraine. So we've tried to find the seams between private sector, civil society, academics, student groups, but also press, to lash them up with what we're doing so that when we all show up in a crisis in a place like Ukraine, our friends in Ukraine aren't getting mixed messages or, hey, put a greater emphasis on A rather than B. We're trying to come up and give them help, but in a way that's coordinated, or at least that we're consolidating in some ways the assistance that we're able to provide. It's challenging in these fast-moving environments to bring NGOs together and civil society and the private sector, but if anything, NATO now fully appreciates the role that all of us play. And to be sure, there are things that civil society can do that formal government structures or multilateral organizations cannot, and vice versa. And so we have to understand the core competencies that exist on both the public and private sector, and how they take different forms. But we've really learned some lessons from our experiences together in the Balkans over the years, from our experiences in the Middle East, and elsewhere. And I think Ukraine is a positive example where many of us are trying to be more transparent about what we're doing and to extend a hand to other organizations that are also trying to do the same thing. So thank you for raising that. It's not just about proper official institutions or agencies, it's about a much wider collective effort.
Thank you, Ambassador Smith. Thank you, Julie. Since I see our participant from Ukraine is already on the screen and ready to participate. So thank you again for coming to Sofia to visit us. Thanks for your excellent remarks that I think set the stage for the next discussions in a very good way. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Ambassador Smith for her excellent participation.
And if I could thank you for such a wonderful job at moderating this discussion, and also it's great to see you, Dragomir. I think you know that I am regularly branded as the NATO nerd, so I brought you a little mug to make you also a NATO nerd. You are a NATO nerd. You worked at NATO, so by default, you're part of the club. But thanks for all you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Wonderful.
И така, уважаеми колеги и приятели, сега продължаваме с другата, наистина не по-малко и по-динамична част от сесията. Първо, нека да ви се представя. Аз съм Николай Кръстев, журналист от Българската национална телевизия. Преди това съм формирал своята експертиза в сферата на международните и регионалните отношения тук в нашия регион и Западните Балкани, Черноморският регион. И за мен наистина е чест да бъда тук като модератор в Софийският форум за сигурност. Благодаря за тази чест да бъда в момента тук и разбира се да бъда близко до господин Ихор Жовка е наистина една, така мога да кажа, чест, защото това е лицето на президентството в Украйна, което дава този дипломатически капацитет, за да обясни на нас всички, които се интересуваме от хода на войната, къде днес стои Украйна в усилията за формирането на крайната формула за мир. Така че сега наистина, за мен наистина, предполагам, че и за вас като експерти и журналисти, тук ще бъде интересно да чуем господин Игор Жовка. И така, thank you very much, Mr. Жовка, to be our guest on this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Krastev, dear participants of the conference, Minister, distinguished guests. First of all, let me start with thanking the organizers of the event for having this very important and timely event. And you know, I really like the name of the event, Winning the Peace in Ukraine. You're absolutely right when formulating this topic, this subject. For more than 600 days already, we are winning. We are winning the peace. And we are winning it not only in Ukraine, not only for Ukraine. Definitely the Russian aggression, which started in 2014 and which evolved into the open aggression in 2022, started against Ukraine. Why it started in 2014? Because unfortunately, in the 21st century, we together haven't learned many lessons, which aggressor probably wanted us to learn, but unfortunately, or didn't want to learn. But unfortunately, we were not reacting. Then in 2008, after refusing to give membership action plan to Ukraine and Georgia, we received the aggression of Russia in Georgia. In 2014, when aggressor state started its attempted annexation of Crimea, the international community was silent at the beginning. We're not reacting, or even asking the then authorities of Ukraine to be silent, not to react, not to provoke, to tame the beast. What we received in 2014, we received the attempted annexation of the Crimea Peninsula. Then we received the partially occupation of the Donbass. We were still asked to talk and to negotiate with the aggressor state. And in the format of the Minsk process and in the format of Normandy process, we had, together with some of our partners in Europe, 185 rounds of negotiations with Russia. Where it ended? It ended on the 24th of February 2022 by the open aggression of Russia against Ukraine. But this time the world was not silent. Putin made several mistakes when making this decision on invading the whole territory of Ukraine. He overestimated the capacity of his armed forces, claiming that Russian armed forces is the second strongest army in the world. By the way, this myth has evaporated in Ukraine practically in the first months. Then he underestimated the strength of armed forces of Ukraine. And the third very important mistake he made, he underestimated the level of unity around Ukraine. Unlike in 2014, in 2022, the world reacted immediately by introducing sanctions, by starting to deliver weaponry to Ukraine, by giving the financial assistance, by giving the political support, by giving a boost to our bid for membership to EU by granting the candidate status to my country in June last year. And I can prolong this list. So very important now, when we're having the 600 plus days of war, yeah, unfortunately, we can say that, or rather we cannot say the exact date when this war will be ended by the victory of Ukraine. We should have this level of unity as it is. Despite that Russia wants to establish so-called fatigue over Ukraine, despite Russia places the narrative that the West is tired of the war in Ukraine, despite the narrative of Russia, which is spreading now, that the global South is now diverted from Ukraine, especially taking into account, like Russia claims, the recent development in the Middle East. By the way, pay attention who is joyful, whose experts are joyful, analyzing the events in Israel and the Gaza Strip and in the Middle East program. Those are Russian experts. In response, we all should say to them and to us, to ourselves, we're united, Ukraine will definitely win, and Ukraine will definitely have the support of European, Euro-Atlantic community, and the global South. I really remember with admiration the visit of my president to Bulgaria, really a fruitful and resultful visit. And the rumors which were spread, by Russians that Bulgaria will never support Ukraine, or Bulgaria will be having not enough support to Ukraine, it's also evaporated. During the visit of my president, he met Prime Minister, ministers of the government. He met your president. It was a very sincere discussion, tough discussion, but had it. And we have this level of support which Bulgaria can render to Ukraine. Really, thank you for this. Thank you for the level of political support. Thank you for the level of humanitarian support to our people who are now in your country. And thank you for the military support. It's really important to have it from your country as well, because your country is a member to the EU and NATO, and your country were always having good relations and was always supportive to Ukraine. Only together we can win this peace. Why the word peace matters here? Because it's another Russian narrative that Ukraine doesn't want peace. And it's only Russians who want peace. And Ukraine, they claim, wants war. Very strange and stupid narrative, sorry for this. Because these are Ukrainian people who are dying day by day, night by night, civilians, women, children, our soldiers at the front line. They are dying. They're dying for their motherland. They're dying for European continent. And certainly Ukraine is the first country to want peace. Ukrainian people is the first nation to want peace. So that is why my president, exactly a year ago, appeared with this initiative, which is now world famous, and is called Ukraine's Peace Formula. A very simple 10 points peace plan who has very important goal: to deprive Russia from the instruments of the aggression other than on the battlefield. Because on the battlefield, we are fighting them successfully, again, using your support, using your weapon, using your ammunition, using your advice. But if we take other very important areas of what the world economy, if we take UN Charter, or if we take the environmental area, for instance, everywhere we see the aftermath of this Russian aggression. And very important, this peace formula allows all of us, European nations, to reach out to the global South nations. When my president was meeting 22 leaders of the League of Arab States in Jeddah this spring, in May, he addressed to each and every of them, describing the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And in response, he got the speeches from the Arab leaders saying that each and every of them are suffering from the aftermath of this Russian aggression, each in his own way. Somewhere the prices has risen, somewhere the cost of living is too high, somewhere the chains of supply are broken because Russia broke the 3 biggest international maritime ports on the Black Sea, not allowing Ukraine to export its grain. It has opened this possibility for 1 year, but then blocked it. Now Ukraine has alternative routes. And thank you for Bulgaria for having these alternative routes working. When my president was speaking at the G7 summit, at the panel with G7 leaders and Global South leaders, he again was talking about the aftermath of Russian aggression. And in response, he had it from President Lula of Brazil, from President of South Africa, from Prime Minister Modi. Not a single person was telling to my president and to the world community that they are satisfied or they are supporting Russian aggression. This peace formula should lead all of us to peace. The peace in Ukraine, and peace in Ukraine means peace and stability in this part of the world, and in this part of the European continent, Had we stopped the Russian aggression in Ukraine, it would definitely spread to our neighbors and then who knows where. So that is why we feel our responsibility to be really vocal providing this initiative. Now it's more than 80 countries which are united around this initiative. We are having several layers of this initiative. We are meeting regularly with ambassadors of countries participants to this initiative, the ambassadors in Kyiv. We are discussing each and every point, be it food security, be it environmental protection, be it nuclear security or energy security, be it the UN Charter and how to restore adherence to the northern principles of the UN Charter by Russia, be it by bringing Russia to accountability because the aggressor should be punished and the crime of aggression, the mother of all crimes, should be punished by establishing the International Tribunal, and this is our initiative being supported by already 38 members of the core group. So we now have action plan for each and every point, how to make Russia deprived of the instruments of aggression in this or that area. The second layer is we are regularly meeting on the level of national security advisors to the leaders of the countries of the world. We had 2 meetings already. The first was in Copenhagen, and it embraced 15 countries already, including the 4 countries of Global South, Brazil, India, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia. And the second meeting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, there were already 42 participants, including the participant from China, the special envoy of President Xi Jinping, Mr. Li Hui, and he himself was speaking about the aftermath of Russian aggression. The position of China is very clear, for instance, in terms of territorial integrity and sovereignty. They are claiming that each and every state should respect territorial sovereignty and integrity, including that of Ukraine. And the position of China is very clear about the nuclear security. President Xi Jinping, when talking to my president, clearly stated, not a single nuclear state should blackmail or threaten by the use of nuclear weapon to any non-nuclear state. Just to remind you, Ukraine, on a volunteer basis, deprived itself of the first largest nuclear potential in the world back in 1994. We thought that security of Ukraine was guaranteed because we had this Budapest memorandum, but it never worked. Unfortunately, neither in 2014 nor in 2022. And now we're planning to have another meeting, the third meeting of national security advisors in Malta. Very symbolic state. Being the member of the EU, being in the Mediterranean, having some historic experience of, amidst the Cold War. We will be having up to 50 countries or even more, again, at this turmoil during these development of events in the Middle East, discussing how to bring peace to Ukraine and to this part of the world. But the ultimate goal was to have the Global Peace Summit with the participation of the leaders in order to start this process, of implementing the peace formula, implementing each and every 10 points of this peace formula. And in the end, there will be certainly a peace conference when we will fix the defeat of Russia, we will fix the victory of Ukraine, and we will make it impossible the aggression to continue, or if aggressor would like sometimes to renew the aggression, we should all be prepared. And here I'm coming to the part of those security guarantees. You know that in Vilnius, during the NATO summit, we concluded this G7 declaration between the G7 states and Ukraine on granting the security to Ukraine. But we call it G7 plus because immediately up to 30 countries adhere to this declaration. And I'm thanking Bulgaria for adhering to this declaration almost immediately. We're now thinking and already talking with 5 countries of G7 on the bilateral agreements, security guarantees to Ukraine. We started these relevant negotiations. US, UK, Canada, Japan, and just recently yesterday with France. It's high time to start these negotiations with the countries of the Black Sea. I propose to start these relevant negotiations with Bulgaria, with Romania, with Turkey, it's the important state on the Black Sea, with Georgia, and let's together start to take care of this region, this part of the world as well, because the war is also going in the Black Sea. They're still blocking the Ukrainian ports. They are still endangering the free movement of ships and cargoes to the Black Sea. And we, the Black Sea countries, should take responsibility on this. I will probably stop on this. Thank you for your attention. I'm ready to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zhovka, for this very interesting panelist. Mr. Zhovka, please tell me what is the crucial moment of the Ukrainian formula of peace?
The crucial moment for the Ukrainian peace formula.
Yeah.
The crucial moment for the Ukraine's peace formula would be the inauguration summit. Let me explain the logics, because I understand that the partner countries should need this explanation of the state of the events. Why we want this inaugural summit, the peace formula, with the participation of the world leaders to start as soon as possible? Our aim is to have it by the end of this year. This inaugural summit should only start the process of implementing each and every point. After the International Peace Summit, we are ready to have subsequent events on the level of ministers, experts, national security advisors of each and every point of the peace formula. For instance, if we start if we have the inauguration peace summit in November, immediately in December we can have a conference on the food security. For instance, in Turkey, each and every point has its co-leader, a state or several states who are leading this point. So we can have the food security summit in Turkey. We could have an environmental security summit, which is point number 8, somewhere in Brazil. We can have the summit on the exchange of prisoners of war and bringing back the abducted children of Ukraine, somewhere in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has already supported us in exchange of prisoners. We can have the event on the accountability, bringing Russia to justice, somewhere in The Hague. And when we start to implement each and every point, each and every state would unite their efforts in bringing Russia to responsibility in each and every point. What we now have, each and every point has an action plan, and this action plan has been developed not only by Ukraine, it has been developed by the states who are participating in this working group. So now this is the common heritage. Many people ask, where is Russia? Why Russia should not be participating in the inaugural summit? No, Russia will not be participating because Russia is still there. Russia is breaking the UN Charter. Russia is breaking the norms and principles of the civilized world. It's breaking each and every Geneva Convention. But when we will implement points from 1 to 9, and we will come back to point number 10, which is about fixing the results of the war, and hopefully fixing the results of Russia's defeat and Ukraine's victory. Yes, during this final peace conference, Russia, and I don't know who will be representing Russia by that time, but Russia can be present in order to fix it in any kind of document. But Ukraine will not be sitting alone against Russia. We will never, ever sit at the negotiation table alone with Russia. We will sit together with all the countries who will be participating in the implementation of each and every peace plan, point of peace formula plan. So next to us will be sitting our friends from European community, but also hopefully the friends from Global South. That's why we want each and every Global South state to be responsible at least for one point. We do understand, for instance, that China will not be responsible for each and every 10 points, for India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia. But if each of these countries will take 1 or 2 points as a co-leader, that will bring a success, and that will mean that these countries are on the side of civilized countries, on the side of good rather than on the side of England. Look, we now have the situation when practically there are no alternative peace plans coming from these countries. Remember, South Africa were presenting their peace suggestions together with some African leaders. But then President Ramaphosa visited Kyiv together with his fellow colleagues, presidents of 5 more African countries. Then he visited Moscow. And then during the St. Petersburg Forum, when Putin suggested to him 1 million tons of grain free of charge, President Ramaphosa clearly told him, no, Mr. President, I don't need your gifts. Please resume grain from Ukraine initiative. We don't hear alternative suggestions now coming from Brazil. My president had a very good personal conversation with President Lula in New York during the UNGA. Now Brazil is actively participating in the peace formula. Foreign policy advisor to President Lula, Celso Amorim, is a regular participant of the NSA meetings, of both NSA meetings, both in Copenhagen and Jeddah. So we are bringing the global south to the part of the civilized countries, to the part of the countries which are clearly understanding the aggression came from Russia. Ukraine was never aggressive. Ukraine was never meaning to conquer any single part of Russia's territory or any other state. But Ukraine will fight. Ukraine will fight for each and every inch of its territory. And at the same time, striving for peace, striving to bring in the peace and stability to this part of the world, because we do feel the responsibility for the security here in this part of the world. That's why when Ukraine becomes member to the EU and especially to NATO, I believe this will be coming, especially after our victory, it may develop very soon. Ukraine will be always responsive for this part of the world, for the security of this part of the world, because Russia will always be aggressive. And Ukraine will always stay here on the front line to safeguard the security of the European continent.
Аз мога да продължа, разбира се, да питам господин Жовка, но искам на вас да ви дам думата като на хора експерти, които сте също не по-малко като мене професионално изкушени да пиете вода от източника, защото този човек може да ви каже малко повече за това как днес Украйна чисто дипломатически работи за разширяването и изпирането на конфликта и тези условия, които Киев вижда в центъра на решаването на войната, на руската агресия в Украйна. Така че от залата, ако има въпроси. Виждам, че нещата са ви ясни, което разбира се е хубаво, защото това дава възможност за по-така динамичен разговор, но разбира се, мистер Жовка, what is a guarantee for the peace stability in the Black Sea region in Ukrainian part?
Unfortunately, I didn't have the translation. Please, if you can repeat.
Mr. Zhovka, what is the guarantee for the peace in this moment for the Ukrainian formula of peace in the Black Sea, especially?
Well, you know, the strongest guarantee for the peace in the Black Sea and also in the region, from the perspective of Ukraine, should be a full-fledged participation of Ukraine in NATO. You know it better than me, being a member of NATO, that membership in NATO is the biggest security guarantee. But we do understand that before the victory, or even immediately after the victory, Ukraine will not be taken as a member to NATO. Obvious reasons. We do understand that definitely not a single NATO country should now be willing to implement Article 5 or to have boots on the ground in Ukraine. And we don't ask for this for the time being. We are fighting, our armed forces are fighting. We are fighting with the modern equipment which is provided by the NATO members to us. We are using them sometimes even in a more sophisticated way than some other countries because we have to. We have to. Yes, we feel the scarcity of ammunition or some artillery systems of air defense, but we have to defend to our country. We should not be, you know, only asking for your weapon, but we also should be using them to the utmost conditions. You know, for instance, we always say Ukraine has made the biggest advertisement for the Patriot air defense system. Now all of the world knows that definitely the air defense system Patriot can intercept ballistic missiles. It's checked in Ukraine. It's immediately, as soon as we achieve this system, as soon as the system was delivered, immediately intercepted one of the ballistic missiles, which was aimed to target exactly the place where I'm sitting, the central part of Kiev, the building of the office of the president and this court here. But since we don't have this guarantee, the biggest guarantee for the time being, and again, not only for Ukraine, but for all of us, is the security guarantees. And this system, this complex is very important because it's not only about military. With military part, it's okay for the time being. We are providing weapons, but a security guarantee for Ukraine and for this part of the world is also the enough level of sanctions against Russia. And not only enough level, not only the level as it is, but if Russia dares to escalate the level of aggression or will dare to resume the aggression after the victory, it has to understand what the level of the sanctions will be in that case, how the sanctions will immediately increase. That's, by the way, what we left before the open aggression. Remember, my president was asking for the preventive, preemptive sanctions from the European Union, from other parts, from other states. Unfortunately, we didn't have a response. What happened? The open aggression started, and the EU started to implement sanctions against Russia. The sanctions are great, not enough, but still. But it was too late, the aggression started. So that's why a part of the security guarantee is economic sanctions. A part of the security guarantees is already now finding the mechanism for frozen Russian assets to be working on the restoration of Ukraine, not even only after the victory, but immediately for the fast recovery projects. Security guarantees for Ukraine and for this part of the world is something concrete of membership of Ukraine to the EU, because economic stability of Ukraine is also part of security guarantees for this part of the world. Even now, not being a part of the EU, we're integrating some sectors of Ukraine economy into the European single market. Look what happened with the electricity market of Ukraine. Immediately at the beginning of war, we connected our system, we plugged our electricity system into ENTSO-E. And yes, at some times we were providing the surplus energy to the European countries. When we needed the surplus energy, when the shellings of Russia started, you provided us the energy, electricity. The market is working, the common market is working. The same I can talk about IT and some other sectors. So this document or documents we will be having with the countries is very important to be thoroughly negotiated, but to be quickly negotiated, because we don't have time. These security guarantees are needed to Ukraine before the victory, during the victory, for the victory, and after victory. And that's why I'm once again suggesting this Black Sea security guarantees, Black Sea multilateral pact. We try to have this dialogue with some of your countries before the open aggression. Unfortunately, we didn't have the success by that time. By now, with this open aggression still pending, we need to more intensify our efforts, to unite our collective efforts in the region of the Black Sea. By the way, we are talking about this not only with the Black Sea countries. Our global partners, such as UK, such as US, are also supporting this idea.
Благодаря ви, господин Жовка. Thank you very much, Mr. Жовка, for your intervention here in our conference. Сега ми позволете да дам думата на госпожа Мила Серафимова, която е от Софийския университет, преподавател в него, менеджер на програмата Медии и комуникации в Софийския форум за сигурност, която ще ни представи изложбата "Солидарни с Украйна". Слава Украйна!
Героям слава!
Благодаря за възможността заедно да открием тази изложба, която е подготвена от Софийски форум за сигурност. Темата на изложбата е солидарност с Украйна, ужаса на войната срещу Украйна в снимки и детски рисунки. Знаем известната сентенция, че една снимка говори по-силно от 1000 думи. Също така знаем, че всъщност действията говорят по-силно и от образите. Затова и ние предприехме организирането на тази изложба, защото солидарността означава преди всичко действия. Докато подготвях изложбата, минахме през стотици кадри от войната, от самото и начало до последните дни. Това, което на мен ми направи особено силно впечатление, е, че образът на войната и ужасът на войната винаги е един и същ. Първо прави впечатление от тези снимки и от детските рисунки, че всъщност войната ескалира. И също така аз съм от това поколение, което знаеше, че войната е нещо ужасно, но тя е в учебниците по история и в музеите и ние бихме искали да бъде така, но реалността сега е различна. Това, което ще може да видите след малко, изложбата е разположена в тази зала. Това са едни теми и образи на войната, които ние сме виждали наистина като деца в учебниците. Виждаме въоръжени мъже, които се сбогуват с семействата си, виждаме безпомощни старци и деца, разрушени градове, разрушени църкви, съсипана природа. Кадрите ни връщат в миналото, но също така виждаме, че те се повтарят, въпреки че сега войната се води с съвременни оръжия, технологии, говорим за дронове, сателити, но за съжаление темите, образите, ужасното лице на войната остават едни и същи. Също така съм напълно съгласна с посланник Смит, която каза, че ние трябва да обясним тези образи на нашите деца, защото те са онлайн през цялото време и е логично, че формулата за мир, това е работа на дипломатите и разговорите се водят в сферата на международните отношения, но аз смятам, че ние трябва да се подготвим тази формула да я обясним и на нашите деца, тъй като именно това е ехото на войната, нашето виждане за мира, те ще предадат на следващите поколения. Съответно, отговорност на дипломатите е да стигнат до мира, но ние трябва да го обясним и на нашите деца, които пък ще предадат тази представа на своите деца и на следващите поколения. Така че благодаря ви, че заедно ще можем да открием тук изложбата. Идеята е тя да бъде дигитализирана, тъй като наистина следващите поколения и младите хора най-вече дигитално се докосват до тези образи. Ще бъде представена и в други градове на България. Искам да благодаря на посолствата на САЩ и на Украйна за предоставените снимки, за съдействието при организиране на изложбата. Може да я разгледате, като също така в кафе паузата ще имате възможност да видите и един филм, посветен на проблема с пленниците в Украйна. Така че заповядайте, изложбата е в задната част на залата. Благодаря ви. Тази книга с рисунки на УНИЦЕФ може да ви вземете в залата също. Да.
Руки зав'язані весь час були. О. І очі зав'язані. І темно було тут. Заходить там цей якийсь наглядач, кричить, щоб лежали всі і не ворушилися. Я знаю, що ось ми з двох сином. А тут бочка була, щоб в туалет ходили, типа. А тут якісь було, коротше, тут нас багато було людей, то один по другому лазили вночі там, щоб до бочки та й добратися, до туалету. Яка тут туалет, бочка така, обрізана така. А тут все покотом всі лежали люди. Не знаю, скільки там, 19, казали, чоловік, не посчитаєш там. Ми ось все так лежали з краю. І дуже холодно було тоді. Мерзли. Це ж березень був. Так, покотом. Все було заповнено людьми. Я не пам'ятаю, скільки там їх. 19, вроді, говорили. А ми ось з боку лежали.
Мене звати Каріна Лабурець. У мене тато в полоні вже 18 місяців. Його забрали в Димирі, забрали з власного автомобіля.
Шукаю свого чоловіка Івана, якого 28 лютого затримали російські військові за фразу «Слава Україні».
Сина забрали військові Російської Федерації на блокпосту тут у Димирі біля пожежної частини. Я дружина Максима і мама Данічки. Їх 10.03.22 року забрали солдати Російської Федерації.
З Димирської громади під час окупації забрали 43 чоловіка в полон. Я не знаю, де їх всіх тримали, але мого сина тримали на Вікналенд. І більшість людей було на Вікналенд, де їх катували, питали, допити робили, непонятно за що. 400 чоловік по Київській області забрали. А по Україні більше 24 тисяч людей забрали в полон.
was the moment.
Тия кабели няма да е много хубаво.
Защо?
Кабелите.
Кабелите.
So we agreed that we do something like 5 minutes intros, or I'll ask you each of you a question.
Yeah.
And you answer it in 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Sure.
And then I'll do a second round of questions among in the panel, and then I'll open up.
Good. Now you look so concerned, that's why.
Добре дошли на този последен панел на днешната конференция. За да може дискусията да тече свободно, аз предлагам да го направим на работен език английски. So I'll switch to English and we're gonna do this in English for the sake of the flow of the conversation. I asked our colleagues not to go with big speeches, but rather to try and have a conversation. Because when we talk about European security architecture, this used to be kind of the academic, one of the topics for academia to dwell upon. Mainly it was about history, it was about the Cold War, especially the second half of the Cold War, and then the reunification of Europe. But today it seems that all of the institutions that
have been so critical for the European security architecture are either changed or changing, or are going to, or have basically left the scene, so to say. The brutal attack of Russia in Ukraine has made big changes, big ruptures in the continent and in the European security architecture. And today it seems that we're in some sort of an interregnum. We know that we are not anymore in the, in the state of the late 90s, but also the new order has not been born. One case in point here is, of course, OSCE, an organization that used to be kind of the cornerstone of the European security architecture, currently in a very dire situation because, obviously, of the war. If you ask European policymakers today, they will probably tell you that the European security architecture to them is two things. It's NATO and the EU. And these are the only kind of known entities out there that we very much rely on, and which are both changing as well. Clearly, NATO's expansion to Finland and Sweden signifies the change this organization is undergoing, the special role of Turkey, which way the alliance is going, is in some cases also quite unknown, I would say. As far as the EU is concerned, the EU's enlargement is the big question mark, a topic that has become very much a hot topic again, very much on the policymakers' minds. Why? Again, for the reason of the geopolitical nature of the EU membership nowadays. Exactly because the EU is part of this very, I would say, disbalanced because of the war, or imbalanced picture of the security architecture. And so the EU would enlarge in order to really firm up the kind of the security dimensions in its neighborhood. And most importantly, it will most probably offer the beginning of negotiations with Ukraine already in December of this year at the European Council. Not to mention, of course, the Western Balkans, who have been waiting for this new momentum for quite some time, and who will now hopefully make use of that opening. One third bit of this picture, and something that we have not been talking about a lot, is the EPC, the European Political Community, a platform for minilateral consultations, but also for coalitions on various topics of strategic interest for countries in Europe, not only for EU member states, a forum where the UK can sit at the table without being in a position of asymmetric relationship vis-a-vis the Commission, which obviously is not something the UK would like to do. The EPC has, however, had a bit of a difficult third summit now in Granada. It was actually much less, it has delivered much less results than one has been hoping for. And I guess the question is, can the EPC also serve a meaningful role in this idea for of a European security architecture? So what is on the horizon, if we think about the continent, I will ask this question to Ognian Minchev, who is known to probably all of you here in this room, a political scientist with an extremely wide strategic thinking. And so this is my question to you. What is the horizon of European security?
Thank you, Vesela. Every architecture usually starts with a project, architectural project. So if we speak about an upcoming changes in European architecture, we have to start with a project, and the project probably has to refer to changing the mental software of security thinking and acting in United Europe. As we all know, and Vesela started with this point, European integration emerged as a project of soft power and developed very successfully as a project of soft power. And the zenith of this soft power impact of the European project was in the 1990s, when Europe turned to be the model for the entire world in a process of democratic change, how to arrange the relationships between nations, and how to reduce the risks of any security challenges. So we are living in another epoch, unfortunately, which we are allowed to develop after the beginning of our century. And we have to change the mental software of European security architecture, knowing and basing our founding our efforts in that aspect on the presumption that Europe has to defend itself in some old ways and instruments, to restructure itself as a geopolitical power, geopolitical center, which has defense capabilities, which has a clear understanding before everything else that it has to meet challenges and rivals which Europe may have considered as partners in the previous decades. So this is the first topic. Before changing the institutions or assessing the institutional performance, we have to take care of changing our mental software on the issues of security. This is first. Secondly, in a more detail, there are certain priorities which have to be met by United Europe in that respect. The first priority, of course, is to build and develop significant and successful architecture of defense on its eastern border. Related to the war in Ukraine, but not also to the war in Ukraine, because unfortunately challenges from the east, from the regime of Putin and its possible heirs could lead this crisis to other dimensions too, God forbid, but we have to be ready about that. So this eastern flank of Europe and of NATO should be considered as a key aspect of the European security architecture, and we see positive tendencies in that respect. In the last year and a half after the Russian aggression against Ukraine, we have encountered the developing of a relatively new geostrategic center in northeastern Europe, which involves the efforts of Poland, of the Baltic countries, of Ukraine, of course, itself, Romania, and some countries in Central Europe. And this new geostrategic center has to be a very dynamic organization of security efforts of the entire European continent in order to stand against the most dangerous challenge to European security, which is the ambitions of authoritarian Kremlin nowadays. Third point I would like to make, and two more short points, and probably we'll talk about that later on in our panel. A very important aspect of the European security architecture in short-term and mid-term perspective is to cope with the effects of this entire system of Russian hybrid war against Europe. I'm talking about system. It's not simply campaign, it's not simply propagandist effort, it's a system. We have to face the fact that Russian propaganda system has entered the levels of European consciousness which we need to assess, to understand, and then try to cope with it. One basic aspect of the success of Russian hybrid war and propaganda campaign against Europe is the fact that it has integrated itself in terms of basic topics of propaganda. It has integrated itself deep into the political structure of European thinking and European action. We are having political debate in Europe, political debate in which a Russian propagandist thesis have made actually significant part of the thesis of the political counterparts in the European political debates. So when we talk about liberalism and conservatism, left and right and so on and so forth, we have to meet elements of Russian propaganda in the background of this political debate. And this is very dangerous because Europe needs political pluralism. Europe needs all the aspects of its political system, left and right, liberal and conservative, and we don't have to divide those political debates into right, legitimate, and illegitimate because they've been imported. We have to make a clear distinction between those aspects of European political debate. What has been imported and what is a part of our legitimate political discussion, which has no borders but the borders of authoritarianism and other non-democratic aspects of political behavior. And last but not least, to end up with, at this point, I'll mention that creating a new security architecture, Europe has to take about a very important aspect of its civil peace. This is the issue of migration. We cannot live in an environment in which we have declared particular positions about migrations. We have created Frontex, we have created borders, we have created institutions, and on the other side, we are tolerating practices of violating our own European laws on migration, and therefore neglecting significant challenges to our security coming from that hectic, wild migration which is pressing up at European borders and European cities and so on and so forth. I'll end up here, and probably I will join later on in the debate with the other colleagues.
Thank you very much. Indeed, migration seems to be very much on Europeans' mind and drives the security debate in a way that we see repeating from 2015, but also on top of all the other crises. But I'm sure we'll come back to your other points as well. Gergana Karajova is a colleague I have known for many, many years. I should say Ambassador Karajova. Gergana has now the big portfolio as Director General for Political Affairs at the Foreign Ministry. And I think she is really the right person to ask how the geopolitics, both of enlargement but also of EPC, and in general, how the European security architecture conversation looks like from a Bulgarian perspective, because this used to be privilege of the foreign ministries. Now it's actually much brighter. We're talking about weaponization of all sorts of interdependencies, including weaponization of migration, right? So how can we find also space for a country like Bulgaria in this conversation?
Благодаря, Весела. I wanted to begin with the OSCE that you mentioned because it's often overlooked, and it was really a fundament of the European security for decades now. Difficultly built, and it brings with it important instruments of arms control, like the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. And here I just want to point out about this element and aspects of the mechanisms of arms control, which are dismantling, unfortunately, only due to Russia behavior this years. We are talking of the conventional and the CFE, the Conventional Arms Control Treaty, but not only the suspension of the New START Treaty, which is dealing with the most dangerous arsenal of our weapons, and possibly even the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. These are this poses a risk of escalation and dismantle the basis of the security architecture and of the risk prevention and non-conflict escalation. Just not to forget about those. Of course, we should strive for Russia to come back to its compliance, to come back to these instruments, but in hoping, we should continue the dialogue and to think forward of what you have pointed to. European Union enlargement, EPC, of course. We've been witnessing formidable, I would say, status of unity and mobilization within the European Union in the situation of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and formidable and very effective instrument of military support have been mobilized. I'm talking mainly of the European Peace Facility, of course, which was, as you know, designed for other purposes, but the most pressing ones came to us, and we have the right priorities now. Unfortunately, those are related to our neighboring region, the Black Sea, Ukraine, as we speak, and we should continue this military support as long as needed, as the Vilnius Summit stated, and we are committed to that. It's serious. Let me back to enlargement and the Western Balkans. It's a very important topic for Bulgaria, as we all know. The challenges that you mentioned, disinformation, hybrid threats, also destabilization, are pertinent to many of those countries. The threats are coming from Russia, but not only, China and other state and non-state actors. Of course, here we are not talking so much about the our allies such as Albania and Republic of North Macedonia, but more vulnerable ones as Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina with Republika Srpska. And we have to be vigilant and to go into a dialogue in order not to allow narratives of balance between East and West and East, and balance between values to prevail, basically. So you're right that the geopolitical moment for enlargement is ripe, and we are very much hopeful that the partners will be ready to reciprocate and to commit into this very crucial moment. Also on the EPC, it's a very important platform, of course.
Thank you. Maybe we can go back both to the enlargement and to the EPC, because I think, first of all, this story of the new momentum is one that is not told often enough here. And secondly, the EPC is also, I think, a bit undervalued in terms of the options it could give if they're taken by the member states. But maybe we can do this in the second round. I'm delighted that we have also Alexandra von Namen with us today. She is a journalist and she is bureau chief for the Deutsche Welle in Brussels. She told me that she has been posted in Moscow for 5 years, back in the kind of era of hope for Russia, if I can put it this way. Looking at European security from Brussels, I guess it looks different in the sense that it's further away from the front line, so to say. That war is not that close, but there are also other wars that one can probably see better. Like, for instance, what is happening in Gaza today is clearly on the agenda of Brussels policymakers more than probably in our region. How do you think this debate is unfolding, especially in the last weeks? We're talking also about Ukraine fatigue in the US. There is quite a lot of nervousness about the US elections. How prepared seems Brussels, and here I mean both the EU and the NATO side, for this kind of very unpredictable security situation in and around Europe?
Well, I think it's fair to say that when you talk with diplomats in Brussels, whether it's at NATO headquarters or at the European Commission's headquarters, you really sense that there are worries and fears. What's next for the support for Ukraine? Last week, NATO defense ministers met in Brussels, and was just a few days after the horrific terrorist attacks in Israel. And of course, that was big on the agenda, and the question was whether what's happening in Israel could distract the West and to divert the Western support for Ukraine. And we heard today from the US ambassador emphasizing that the US is capable and willing to provide both support to Ukraine and, of course, assistance to Israel. But I'm sensing that fears are growing. Whether that is really the case, last week, as you might remember, the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, visited Brussels to shore up support for Ukraine that is now so important to survive the upcoming winter. And we asked him whether he is concerned, and he said, yes, everyone is afraid in Ukraine. We don't know what's going to happen. He said, we ask our allies, will you still supporting us? They said yes, but we still don't know what might happen in the next weeks or months. So concerns and fears are growing, especially when you when you look at the problems the US Congress is having with agreeing to continue with its military assistance for Ukraine. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with the name Jim Jordan. He is, or was until yesterday, I think, a candidate for the role of the Speaker of the US Congress. And he, as somebody who is a strong supporter of Donald Trump, has always, almost always, voted against any assistance for Ukraine. So if he would become the speaker, the next speaker of the House, that, of course, that would have consequences for the US military assistance for Ukraine. So in this situation, of course, you are asking yourself maybe, is Europe capable of replacing what the US is providing Ukraine with? And the clear answer is no, you are not. And that is what leaders also admit, that for now it's not possible. The EU has started to undergo certain changes. Member states are willing to ramp up their ammunition production. They are using the European Peace Facility to buy weapons and ammunition, and there are also, only this week, there was the first ever only EU military exercise that took place in Spain. So there is a lot of change going on, but still we are not so far to say we could continue supporting Ukraine on our own. And at the same time, if I may add, because we also spoke about this growing Ukraine fatigue in the European Union, I covered the election in Slovakia, and it was very clear during the election campaign that there is a growing dissatisfaction with the Western support for Ukraine. Many people are not patient anymore. They would like to see, peace talks. They would like to also, they are suffering under the economic consequences of the war. And the result, well, we saw it at the election in Slovakia with Mr. Fico becoming the new prime minister and winning the election, or about to become a new prime minister. His party won the election, clearly exploiting pro-Russian sentiments and anti-Ukrainian sentiments among people there. So I think we are at a very crucial time, and there is a lot of uncertainty there.
Thank you very much. Did you, because you have been reporting on the Slovak elections, I'm sure you have been also following the Polish elections. I think these were probably the most important elections for Europe in this year, without wanting to diminish the importance of others, but I think especially in this situation and witnessing how toxic the election campaign in Poland was, also vis-a-vis Ukraine, but also vis-a-vis Germany and the EU in general. Do you think that their next shocks, so to say, on the European, from the European side, that one could expect, for instance, how important are the European Parliament elections in kind of bringing to the fore this sort of, I don't know, sentiment of, as you say, impatience, of fatigue, or even of, lack of understanding that this is a war against the West. Actually, it's not only a war on Ukraine itself.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the Polish election, that was a big surprise, and I was there indeed on the election eve and in Warsaw, and it was very clear that the liberal opposition parties are able to form a coalition, that they have the majority, and I think that from Brussels' perspective, this is definitely good news, because they are promising to mend relations with the country's relations with Brussels, with Berlin, with Paris. They are also promising to support Ukraine and to end ongoing disputes over different rule of law issues. So I think from the perspective of the people in Brussels, the diplomats and representatives of the European Union, this result was quite welcome and encouraging. When we talk about what's going on in general in Europe, the growing Ukraine fatigue, that's of course something that will be a big topic probably, because we don't expect the war to end soon. Unfortunately, there will be a big topic for the European elections next year. We just had the recent polls in France where Le Pen and her party is ahead of everyone else. So we see that there are some developments that are concerning. And in addition, right now, the European Union is also facing other important challenges. Migration, we already talked about that a bit, problems that they need to tackle in order to be able to have a good campaign, you know, to show people that they are delivering. Again, it's not going to be easy. And in addition, we have to watch out for disinformation campaigns, for different attempts by different, mostly pro-Russian actors to meddle in our internal European affairs. I think that will be one of the biggest topics for the upcoming European elections.
Yes, especially as a journalist, you have also, you're also on the front line of that war. But let's stay with our focus. I will ask our panelists maybe one more question, but then I will ask you to maybe participate, ask, have an intervention in a couple of minutes. Returning to what Ognian started with, you described the 4 aspects of insecurity. I'm sure there are even more, and we can do a long list. There is obviously the energy bit, there is also the AI, digital, and so on, cyber, and so on. But if we talk about peace for a moment rather than about war, what is that you think would be needed to bring peace to the region and to the east mainly? I mean, what is in your mind a kind of maybe, if not the ideal, but the most probable kind of situation that would get us to that point?
In a state of war, the most important instrument to bring peace is to show decisiveness, to guard your freedom and your independence and your values. Because otherwise, if you show flexibility, in brackets, or you show unwillingness to defend your positions, then you might face additional pressure. When we turn back, we see decades in which European countries, European elites were trying to develop positive partnership relations with Russia, and they made many compromises on that matter in order to prove, in order to convince the Kremlin that Europe is actually wants to be a friend of Russia and wants to integrate Russia, step by step integrate Russia into this European mainstream of partnership and freedom and democracy and so on. We saw that the regime of Mr. Putin actually took advantage of that kind of policies, and it based its aggression on the presumption that European has nowhere to go but to be soft on us. So what we need to show now, and thanks God Europe is already showing that, and probably will have to continue with those policies towards the Kremlin. We have to show that we are ready to defend ourselves. And we are ready to defend not only ourselves in terms of material, physical security, but we are also determined to defend our dignity. Because as we speak about those systematic efforts of Russian propaganda against Europe, those efforts on behalf of Russia show disrespect towards Europe, show disrespect to the values of Europe and to the opportunity to be partners with Europe at equal footing. So if you keep Europe as a hostage of your negative propaganda, at the same time expect Europe to be friendly to you, this is actually a question of dignity, not only a question of physical security infrastructure. And that is very important to remember and to practice in everyday politics.
So what would get us closer to peace in that way?
First of all, military victory of a particular kind. I'm not military expert and I cannot say what does it mean, what that concept of military victory implies on the fronts of Ukraine against Russian invasion. But military victory of Ukraine is a key prerequisite for peace, because otherwise, if we presume any kind of defeat, it means that the defeat of Ukraine would mean consecutive defeats of other countries and other positions of Europe vis-à-vis its eastern fronts. So victory of Ukraine in that war is a key prerequisite for establishing stable peace with Russia, and probably stimulate particular changes in Russian politics, in Russian governing mentality, and in Russian plans for the future, in order to really actually bring to the fore the opportunity of establishing constructive and perspective relationships with Russia for the future.
Thank you. We talked very briefly about what happened in Israel and Gaza. It seems to me that we do not discuss that much how those two crises of security interact with each other. Are there any spillover effects? When you think about European security, clearly the legal basis is very important, but I think also the kind of the material effects in terms of the concrete dimensions of security, like, you know, I don't know, ships, equipment being moved to the one theater instead of the other, but also the sheer, you know, energy and time that political leaders are ready to invest in this changes. So how do those two crises interact with each other, you think?
I think it's too early to analyze a possible spillover effect or a kind of a connection between the two theaters. Of course, some of the outcomes and impact you've described can occur. But I want to come back to Ognian Minchev's point of that the appeasement is not an option in this scenario, and a possible way to peace would be to guarantee, in the case that we are talking for Ukraine, to set the conditions and to feel secure and confident to choose the settlement terms when this would happen. it could not be soon enough, as our colleague pointed, but the feeling of tiredness and impatience is not that we can afford for a third or fourth time to make the same mistake in a decade. That's my assertion and my conviction.
You mean for the third or fourth time in a decade, in the sense that?
In the sense that we've been chosen some kind of a settlement when Georgia war occurred, then in 2014 when Crimea annexation occurred. Those were clearly a kind of diplomatic appeasement measures that didn't bring the expected results, but the opposite, assertiveness and then unraveling of the security architecture and our common security, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's very clear. Thanks a lot. Alexandra, to you, you were in Moscow when Medvedev and Putin basically firmed up the regime as we know it today. If you think about the trajectory that Putin has taken and his regime has taken, what do you think would be the continuation of that trajectory? In other words, if Putin were to escalate, because Ognian said we need a military victory for Ukraine and then we need some sort of settlement. If that would happen, I guess there would be an escalation also on Russian side. I mean, what do you think is the horizon that Putin has in front of him, given also that he has cancelled all the treaties that Gergana mentioned?
Well, I think first I just wanted to agree that everything that happened after the war in Georgia, after the first war in Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, all of that, and this unwillingness or incapability of the European and transatlantic actors to find the right response to Russian aggression, all of that has emboldened Vladimir Putin and his regime, and that would be my assumption. That is why we are here right now. I think that, as our colleague said, the only way to get him to have a seat at the negotiating table is to make sure that they are not winning the war. I'm not sure whether it's because the longer the war drags on, the more people in Europe will feel that and be impatient. So it could be a risk that one day Volodymyr Zelensky's government will be asked by its allies to consider talks. So the only right time would be to start them if Russia withdraws from occupied territory, if they feel the pain that the Ukrainian army is inflicting on them. That's the only way to make him agree to talks, because for now they are not showing any signs of being willing to do so. And when we talk about Putin himself, I think that he needs the war to stay in power, for sure. There is no way back for him from what we understand what's going on inside the country. And of course, there is still the risk of the war escalating. The regime and he himself at times threatens with different means, whether it is a nuclear threat or other threats. So we need to be prepared just to take it seriously, even though when you talk with NATO officials, they say we are always prepared, and we know that regardless of what's happening, the war could escalate. It's not even dependent on our weapons deliveries. It's just that Putin, I think, there's this understanding, cannot be considered anymore as a rational leader. So there is a risk of escalation, even though there are, of course, experts saying that it's not very likely that it will happen. But the risk is there, I would say.
Thanks a lot. I think with this fairly, what should I say, grim picture, we can open now the floor for your comments, your questions to the panel. I know there are many people who have been working on European security in the past years and decades in this room. It would be great to hear from all of you. Please, the Ambassador of Georgia.
Hello again. Thank you so much. It was very interesting topics. I totally agree with Mr. Michev that definitely the Europe should be united when it comes to the security architecture, because only to put Russia under the leash, they should see on the other side some strong unity. This is the most important part of it. What happened in my country, for instance, like in 2008, and today we have to learn the lessons. How the international institutions are not working till today. For instance, OSCE, United Nations, we have the 2 black holes in Georgia, which still today under the occupation, and we don't have any access on this territory when it comes to the international institutions. I think that this peace in Ukraine it's inevitably important for all of us, because to learn the lessons like from us as well, like how to step forward in terms that when it's gonna over, and it's gonna be over with the winning of the Ukraine, I'm definitely sure that we should put on the table all these lessons learned, what has happened in our part of the world. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? There is one over there. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks a lot. In the event of a frozen conflict in Ukraine, can the alliance be obliged to continue its support for Ukraine, and will the individual countries continue to keep up their commitment to the alliance?
Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Koyan Ananiev, from a student in the Sofia University.
Thanks a lot. And your question is how to sustain the support for Ukraine?
Yes, and to keep the individual countries their commitment to the alliance.
Okay. And there is, can you pass on the mic to your colleague? Yes.
And I also have a question on the topic mentioned that Slovakia had elections and they elected a party which has prime minister that is against the help in Ukraine. And from what I see, that is some kind of movement in some countries which the public withdraws the support for Ukraine. So what has to be done in order to sway the public again into a more, how to say it, just a moment, more passionate help for Ukraine and its cause, to stop the Russian aggression in the region.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very important question about publics and what role public opinions play when we talk about European security. Daniel.
Thank you. My name is Daniel, Foreign Relations Committee. I've listened to President Biden's address of the nation, and I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts about connecting the dots. Do you see, as President Biden clearly sees, a dotted line or a direct line connecting what has happened last week in Israel with the ongoing aggression in Ukraine? How do you see Russia's involvement in both? Do you conclude, based on your expertise, that Russia is involved, or do you think they are just enjoying the fruits of something that has been assisted by Iran in both cases, but not directly involved?
Okay. We'll come back to the panel now. If you have other questions or in the meantime, please let me know. And maybe we can start the other way. We can start from Alexandra. You can pick any of the questions.
Maybe I start with Slovakia because I've just been there. What we need to understand, and Slovakia is not the only member state of the European Union in which we have some pro-Russian sentiments still in the society, with some people seeing their, expressing sort of nostalgia for the country's communist past. So it's there. But what happened in Slovakia, and we saw the results after the election or during the election, is that there was a massive disinformation campaign that started after the annexation of Crimea. And we are speaking there about thousands of Facebook pages, about more than 300 outlets that post on the internet as being news sources. So 2014, we are now 2023, a lot of time to influence public opinion there. And the Slovak authorities, they didn't really seem to find a way to address the problem. There was, when you maybe remember, a huge scandal when a Russian intelligence officer was caught red-handed on a video, bribing a so-called journalist to spread pro-Russian propaganda. Even after this huge scandal, the outlet that this person was working for, writing for, was only temporarily blocked, and it's still online. So that's a real problem, that those pro-Russian disinformation agents are working freely and influencing public opinion, and the results we then see when it comes to elections.
Maybe just to add that, because the European Council on Foreign Relations, we have been doing public opinion polling across Europe for a number of years now. Slovakia and Bulgaria are very similar in terms of public opinion. They're very similar in terms of response or lack of response to hybrid threats. There are many other similarities. If you talk about energy dependence, dependence in the defense realm from Russia, and volatility of the political system as well. So the fact now that Fico is back is actually not surprising, also having in mind how Bulgarian politics work. I mean, it is really, I think our countries show the volatility of this whole region, and in that sense, the Polish elections were, I think, a very important kind of way to sway this again. But Gergana.
Thank you, Vasila. I want just to first to address the question of Mr. Lauer, if you allow me. It was a part of also of your question. I didn't want to speculate in my first answer, but the two conflicts, those are not crises, those are wars, horrific wars. I want, of your two hypotheses, I would go rather to the second, that Russia could, in a way, take strategic advantage of what's happening. Also exploiting some of the aspects of that the Israel-Palestine is a divisive dossier, as we know, and it has also back into the decades some ideological, coloring and implications. But I lost my thought a bit. I think that on this case, Russia, for the time being, is saying the right thing, coming back to direct talks, ensuring the peace to prevail, ensuring the two-state solution to be reinvigorated. What is lacking to me, though, is a clear condemnation or clear stance by the Palestinian Authority, because Hamas is not Palestine, of what has happened in Israel. This condemnation is still lacking from Palestinian Authority and from the League of Arab States even, and it's not going unnoticed. I can briefly address also Kaoyan's question. The commitment of the Allies towards Ukraine, is it sustainable? It is sustainable, of course, because it is a structured one. It's a long-term commitment, and it goes diplomatic, political, military, humanitarian in this specific time. But what the Allies and the Union are strong about, that we will assist Ukraine to become stronger and to help itself. So the alliance is assisting Ukraine to build in the right way its security and defense structures, to become resilient in every possible way. So this commitment will pay for itself in the long term.
And I guess for Ognian is the question of emotions. So how do we bring back passion?
Well, I would like to refer to two questions from the audience. The first one on dividing national and European publics on the issues of geopolitics, war and peace, and so on. I used to think that Bulgaria is a relatively unique country because in Bulgarian political debate we always had issues of dividing foreign policy and security. Probably most countries are united along those issues and they are divided internally on domestic politics. Now we see that the bad Bulgarian example is actually spreading in many different countries in Europe, and we have divided audiences, divided publics in most European countries on issues of how their own countries and Europe as a whole should behave on key issues of security and foreign policy. That has to be addressed by national and European elites in order to develop and to spread through the public clear visions of European security and European interest. Clear visions. Europe as an entity. Because for better and for worse, for good deeds and for not so good deeds, Europe is a mosaic. We all know that previously, in previous decades, we visited different conferences and meetings and so on. And I'm coming from Eastern Europe, and I put to the floor the issue of Russian policies to Eastern Europe. And people from Spain, from Portugal, even from France say, okay, leave already, move away that your complexes from the Cold War, Russia is different and so on and so forth. They don't understand, they don't know. We probably on our head could not, on our hand, could not understand well the Middle East, we could not understand well the Mediterranean and so on and so forth. Yeah. So this is a mosaic which has positive aspects, but in the present circumstances and in the observable future, we'll need to create common European interest in field of security and in field of foreign policy. Otherwise, we cannot cope with those divisions, not only pro-Eastern, pro-Western in national publics and in European public in general, but we cannot cope also with the different regions of Europe who have regional and national perceptions of their interest and security predicament challenges and so on and so forth. That's very important to be done and to be done by I say European and national elites, because the elites are those who create the interpretations of interests and create therefore organized interests. And to the question of Mr. Lorer, I haven't, probably we, all of us, do not have direct evidences of Russian intervention in the crisis that we have now between Israel and Hamas. But if we speak in a wider frame on this issue, we have to admit that the claim for multipolar world was a tactical claim. It was a claim for a certain period of time. And what we have as a result of this claim is new bipolarity. We have two camps already. Revisionist camp with Russia, with China, with Iran and so on, and the West in general on the other side. The West has become exhausted concept in the 90s and in the early century. Now it's being revitalized by this bipolarization, which is enforced in the world in our epoch, in our circumstances. So what we see, this revisionist camp with its different activities in different regions, is trying to question the division lines between East and West, to put it this way. And in many places they are starting to burn these geopolitical peripheries between East and West. We have the crisis not only in Ukraine, now in Israel with Gaza, Hamas in Gaza, with Karabakh in the South Caucasus and so on and so forth. So we have an explicit relationship with all those crises, and probably the crisis will multiply, unfortunately. So even irrespectively of whether we have direct intervention of Russian actors into the Israeli-Hamas crisis or not, this general tendency of development actually shows clear link between the crisis in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in the South Caucasus, and God forbid to other places too.
I'll come back to Alexandra, because I think here, from what Ognan was saying, what transpires really is the idea of Western unity, not only European, but Western unity. I remember the topic of last year's Munich Security Conference was Westlessness. So there was this notion that the West is nowhere to be found, and then only less than a month later, the West actually was standing together in the face of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Now, 11 sanctions packages later, the EU seems to be the real actor in terms of in terms of the West. And here the European Peace Facility was actually the embodiment of that change of roles, because as the name says, it was not developed to, to be to be financing arms sales, but at the end, it is the EU that has done this job. Now it seems the EU has again succeeded, at least to a large extent, to bridge its differences on the Hamas issue. And in all of that, what is central, I think, is the German role. It's not anything new, but it was Chancellor Scholz who declared the Zeitenwende and so on. They're critics of this phrasing in Germany because people say it's not happening fast enough, not to the extent it was supposed to happen, and so on. But if you look at European unity, how fragile do you think it is from a German perspective?
Well, I would say that it's always fragile. At the same time, we've seen in the past that the European Union has been always able to live up to the challenges that it was facing, and we shouldn't be too pessimistic, I would say, even though Europe's unity might look afraid around the edges already, but we still have, for instance, Germany being the second biggest supporter of Ukraine, even though the German Chancellor so far is not willing to send long-range missiles, cruise missiles to Ukraine for certain reasons. But Germany has increased its military and financial support. Then just let's have a look at France. You remember Emmanuel Macron traveling to Moscow and coming back convinced that he was able to change Vladimir Putin's mind. And now France is supporting Ukraine. They are a big supporter of Ukraine's of opening accession talks with Kiev. That's a big change, I would say. So there is a lot of changes underway within the European Union that, in general terms, I would say, they make or have already made the union stronger than before. So the outlook is not totally grim as we might think at times. At the same time, when we talk about the bigger picture, I think it's important to understand that the West cannot afford to lose the global South. We can impose one sanctions package after the other, but if the countries of the global South they don't believe us, they don't think that we are credible as the West, as the European Union, of course they will find ways to still support Russia or to circumvent certain sanctions, to buy more oil and whatever from Russia. So I think it's important to convince them that it's also in their interest to stand up against tyrants and authoritarian regimes, and Russia in this case in particular. And that is actually what the German government is actively doing with some success. Maybe it's not enough, but I think that it's now on the European Union's agenda, and that's the place where it should be.
Very much. I think these are also good last words. If my panelists don't mind me closing on this note, because it's very difficult these days to find a proper closure that is not utterly sad or pessimistic. So I suggest we leave it with this thought that European unity is actually fragile, but there when we need it. We are all very grateful to Yordan Buzilov and the Sofia Security Forum for bringing us together for this discussion. It's a very timely and very important one, and I hope it was also useful and interesting for you. Thank you once again.
kind of obliged to say some closing words, but instead of make a summary of wrapping up the session, I just want to express my gratitude, first of all, to our excellent speakers who provided a good basis for further discussion, thinkings, and of course, thank you all for coming here. It is indeed very important to have such kind of discussion to better understand the situation, and of course, to put some pressure on Bulgarian politicians. I'm not looking at you, but in general, because I do believe that we have to find a good basis for working together, for finding better solutions for Bulgaria, for the region, for NATO, for the EU. Once again, thank you very much. It was a very interesting and productive discussion. Thank you, the panelists. And let's give them a round of warm applause. Thank you. Okay, that was all. And now lunch.